Amud Yomi, Bava Batra 82b. This is episode 4 in the Amud Yomi series, which started on June 1st. And the Amud is 82b of Tractate Bava Batra, but the idea starts the last line of 82a. So I'll start from there. The last line of 82a is Kana Shlosha Kana Karka Mechama. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Arei Zekan Etachtei Nuvneihen Nukut Alehem. The Mishnah teaches, if one bought 3 trees, he has acquired the ground along with them. I mean, I guess I'm assuming it's 3 trees that are planted in the ground. I mean, sounds obvious, but because sometimes you can buy trees that are detached, right? Is that possible? I don't know. But anyway, if you bought 3 trees that are planted, that are in the ground, then you acquire the ground with them. The Gemara asks, and how much of the field is he acquired? Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says the buyer has acquired the ground that is located underneath the trees and the area between them, and with regard to the space outside the trees and their branches. And now we're turning to Bava Batra 82b, our Amud Yomi, our Amud of the day. Okay, so with regard to the space outside the trees and their branches, he has acquired an area sufficient for a gatherer of figs and his basket in hand to stand close to the tree. That's the space. That's considered the ground under the tree. Okay? Maskifla Rabbi Elazar hashtederch, and we're on the top of 82b now. Maskifla Rabbi Elazar hashtederch ein lo, oyer v'saro yesh lo, derech ein lo, di'ara achritihi, oyer v'saro yesh lo. So Rabbi Elazar objects to this. Now the halacha is that the buyer has no path and must purchase a path through the field to access his trees. If so, does he have possession of an area for the gatherer of his basket and his basket? The Gemara elaborates, he has no path, even though he has no other means of gaining access to the trees, as the ground he acquired along with the trees is considered another land and is not part of the rest of the field. Why then would he have possession of an area for a gatherer and his basket? Amar Rabbi Zeira, midivrei Rabbeinu nilmad, shlo isha, hu de'ein lo derech, ho shnayim yesh lo, de'amar le, be'ara didach, kaimi. Rabbi Zeira says, from the statement, meaning the objection of our teacher, we learn that it is in the case of 3 trees that the owner of the trees has no path, as the buyer acquired a separate piece of land along with the trees. But in the case of 2 trees, in the case of 2 trees, the buyer has a path, as he says to the owner of the field, my trees are standing on your land, as I am allowed to use your field to tend to my trees. I have the right to walk through your land to reach them. Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak le Rave le Rabbi Elazar le Shmuel Rabbe. Diamar Shmuel halach le Rabbi Akiva diamar moicher be'en yafe moicher. Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak said to Rava, shall we say that Rabbi Elazar does not accept the opinion of Shmuel, who was his teacher? As Shmuel says, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says, one who sells generously. According to Rabbi Akiva, one sells in a manner that is advantageous for the buyer and is presumed to have included in the sale even items that were not explicitly specified. In this case, he has sold a tree that remains on his property. The seller grants the buyer the right to access his tree. Amar le lo mo mitokma matnitan Rabbi Akiva. Rava said to him, even if Rabbi Elazar himself agrees with Rabbi Akiva, the Mishnah cannot be explained in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rather, the Mishnah must be in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. who hold that one who sells does so sparingly. And the difficulty that Rabbi Elazar raised against Rabbi Yochanan is predicated on the fact that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. Mi mai midiktani nilu yeshapeh. From where does Rava derive that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? From the fact that the Mishnah teaches if the three trees grew, the owner of the land may cut down the branches that extend into his field, that if it enters your mind that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, why may he cut them down? Why may he cut them down? Doesn't Rabbi Akiva say that one who sells generously? Amar le Amor, Diamar Rabbi Akiva gavi bol vedus, telo machashi ara gavi ilan mishamat le. Rabbi Nachman bar Yitzchak said to him, this does not prove that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. You can say that Rabbi Akiva stated his ruling in the case of a pit and a cistern that are situated in a field belonging to another, which one sells in a generous manner as they do not weaken the land. But did you hear him say that the seller is generous toward the buyer with regard to a tree which can weaken the land? Doesn't Rabbi Akiva concede in the case of a tree that leans out into the field of another, in which the owner of the field cuts down the branches until the full height of an ox goad, the handle that protrudes over a plow? Since the extending branches impede his efforts to plow the field, it is permitted for him to cut them down. This indicates that even according to Rabbi Akiva, one does not grant privileges that are detrimental to his own interests. If so, the Mishnah can be explained even in accordance to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which indicates that Rabbi Elazar does not accept his ruling. Tani kavasi Rabbi Akiva bar Abba, harei ze kone tachtein v'nehen. The Gemara points out it is taught in a Braita in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. If one buys the trees in a field belonging to another, this buyer has acquired the ground that is found underneath the trees and the area between them and outside of the trees and their branches, an area sufficient for a gatherer of figs and his basket. Amar le Abaye le Rav Yosef oisan oiref v'saloi Mizoran Omar leit na tuha Achitzon Zereya esaderech. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, those areas around the trees that are designated for a gatherer of figs and his basket are used for this purpose only at specific times. Who sows that land during the rest of the year, the owner of the trees or the owner of the field? Rav Yosef said to him, you learned the answer in the Mishnah 99b. If one owns a garden that is surrounded by the garden of another, the owner of the inner garden has a right to a path through the outer garden. Even so, the owner of the outer garden may sow the path. Amar le midami hasum lesle beseda lelokeach v'hacha isle beseda lelokeach. Amar le kamitap tanpi peri. Abaye said to him, are the cases comparable? There, in the case of the outer and inner gardens, there is no loss suffered by the buyer when the owner of the outer garden sows the path, as he can still pass through it. But here, there is a loss for the buyer, as the one who bought the trees says to the owner of the field, the fruits that fall from the trees will become soiled by the plants. This case is similar only to the last clause of that Mishnah, which states, if the owner of the inner garden is given a side path so that he suffers a loss of some kind because he cannot take the shortest path to reach his garden, both this owner of the inner garden and that owner of the outer garden are not permitted to sow the path. Similarly, here too, neither the owner of the trees nor the owner of the field are permitted to sow the place designated for the gatherer of figs and his basket. Tani Kos said Abaye, Harize Kone Tachtain Venihen, Yerusalem Kimlo Ero Vesaloi Vesevoze Inam Meshoin Lezoah. The Gemara comments, it is taught in a Braita in accordance with the opinion of Abaye. This buyer has acquired the ground that is found underneath the trees and the area between them, and outside of the trees and their branches an area, and their branches an area sufficient for a gatherer of figs and his basket. And both this owner of the field and that owner of the trees are not permitted to sow it. V'chama yehe benehen, Rav Yosef Amar, Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, mi'arba amos ve'ad shmoine. Rabba Amar Rav Nachman Shmuel, mishmoine v'ad sheish esrei. Amar le Abaye Rav Yosef lo tiplog ale Rav Nachman ditnan masnisin gevasi. The Gemara inquires in how much space must there be between the three trees for them to be considered one unit, which means that the land is acquired by the owner of the trees. Rav Yosef says, Rav Yehuda says, and Shmuel says, the distance between the trees must be from 4 cubits to 8 cubits. Rava says that Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says. Wait a minute. They both say that Shmuel says. Do they disagree on what Shmuel says? Because Rav Yosef says that Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, but Rava says that Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says. So Shmuel said only one thing or the other. Maybe they disagree on what Shmuel said. Okay, that must be what it is. Okay, it must be from 8. So let's get this straight here. Rav Yosef says that Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says the distance between the trees must be between 4 and 8 cubits. Rava says that Rav Nachman says that Shmuel says it must be between 8 to 16 cubits. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, do not disagree with Rav Nachman, as we learned in the Mishnah in accordance with his opinion. Abaye said to Rav Yosef, do not disagree with Rav Nachman. So it looks like Rav Nachman is the one who's right. It's from 8 to 16 cubits. Larger space. Okay. Ditnan. For we learned in the Mishnah in Klayim 4:9. Ditnan hanoteas karmo 16 ama al 16 ama mutar avi zer lasham. As we learned in the Mishnah. Beferish Mishnah in Klayim. What does it say there? One who plants his vineyard 16 by 16 cubits, he leaves 16 cubits between each row of vines, is permitted to bring other species of seeds to the empty spaces between the rows and sow them there. This is not considered a violation of the biblical prohibition with regard to sowing diverse crops in a vineyard, which is one of the prohibitions of diverse kinds. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Maaseh b'Salmon, be'echad shenata es karmo 16 al 16 ama. והיה הופך שיער 2 שורויס לצד אחד וזורע את הניר, לשנה אחרת היה הופך את השיער למקום הזרע, וזרע את הבור במעשה לפני חכמים והתירוהו. Yehuda said there was an incident in the city of Salmon where one individual planted his vineyard 16 by 16 cubits, and he would turn the branches of the 2 rows that were facing each other to one side so that there was a space of 16 cubits between the 2 rows and sow the clearing. The following year he would turn the branches to the place that was sown the year before and would sow the land that had been left uncultivated the previous year, as it had been filled with the branches from the vines. And the incident came before the sages, and they permitted it. This demonstrates that 16 cubits between plants is required for them to be considered separate units. Amar le, Rav Yosef said to him, I do not know about this, but there was a similar incident. This is interesting. Amar le, dana elalo dahavi. Rav Yosef said, I do not know about this. What do you mean I do not know about this? There's a Mishnah. Maybe he didn't know about the story. But he's about to say another story that I'm guessing that would support his opinion. Okay, that's the Amud for the day. Hadron Alach Amud Beis of Bava Batra 82.